Hey friends! Welcome back to your English learning companion, SpeakNest English Podcast Zone, where your voice finds freedom. Today we're diving into a very useful and simple topic: how to talk about your daily routine in English. This episode is great for students, job seekers, homemakers, and beginners from non-English speaking regions like Europe, Africa, and beyond. Knowing how to describe your day is a basic but powerful skill. Let's go!
Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever thought about how often you're asked about your day? Or, what you do routinely?
Seems like such a simple question, doesn't it? Maybe even a bit.
Yeah.
Boring.
Yeah, exactly. Just small talk.
Yeah.
But we've been looking at some source material for this deep dive, and what we found is pretty interesting.
Oh.
Talking about your daily routine, it isn't just idle chat. According to the research we looked at, it's actually, a surprisingly powerful communication skill.
That is interesting. It's fascinating how something that feels so mundane, just describing your day-to-day habits,
Right.
how that's highlighted in these sources as a really practical tool. It's in pretty important situations, too. We've pulled insights from the material you provided, really trying to understand the core reasons why being able to talk about your daily routine effectively is genuinely valuable.
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive, really, to pull out those key nuggets, to uncover the why behind this seemingly simple act.
Because it does come up a lot.
It does. The sources point to specific scenarios where this happens constantly, and sometimes maybe with more weight than you'd expect.
Right. Like, think about meeting someone new for the first time.
Yeah.
That classic, so what do you do question often leads into or kind of includes a version of what's your typical day like?
Or just part of a self-introduction, maybe. Casual or even professional settings.
Definitely. And critically, the material shows it's a frequent question you'll run into in interviews.
Oh, the interview context, walk me through a typical day, or how do you structure your time, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And this is where the power really kicks in, according to what we read.
How so?
Being able to answer that question clearly,
Yeah.
it doesn't just provide information, it makes a significant impression. The sources are pretty explicit about the positive perceptions you can create.
Okay, so what kind of perceptions?
Yes, they directly connect being clear about your routine to how you're perceived. So, if you can explain your routine with structure and detail.
You sound confident, is that it?
That's the first one, yeah. Confidence. It signals you've got a handle on your time, on your responsibilities. It's not just random actions. It's deliberate.
It makes sense. It shows you're not just drifting through the day.
And building on that confidence piece, the sources suggest this structure also makes you sound organized.
Organized, okay.
It implies, planning and a degree of control over your environment and your tasks. It's not just doing things, it's how you approach them.
Right, the methodology behind the day.
Precisely.
What I found particularly interesting was how the sources linked all this to fluency.
Yes, fluency.
Which isn't just about speaking quickly, right? It's about articulating a coherent sequence, using the right language to do it.
Exactly. The ability to walk someone step by step through your day. It demonstrates a strong command of connective language,
Yeah.
temporal sequencing, things like that.
It shows you can structure a narrative, even a simple one.
And that point about fluency is really key, especially when the sources start discussing this specific benefit for language learners.
Oh, this part was great. I might have thought learners should be practicing complex arguments or debates.
Right, something more advanced seeming.
Yeah, but the research points out that routines just naturally lend themselves to using the simple present tense, and that's foundational.
Absolutely foundational. This raises a key question, though. Why is the simple present tense so crucial here? Especially, for beginners.
Good question. What did the sources say?
Well, they highlight that it's the tense we use for facts, for habits, for regular actions, things that happen again and again.
Okay.
So talking about your routine gives you endless personal practice for mastering this tense. You're using basic verbs, forming simple sentences, describing repeated events. It makes the grammar feel, concrete.
So it's like a built-in language lesson, one you carry with you every single day.
That's a good way to put it.
It gives you a practical, sort of low-stakes context to use and really solidify those basic building blocks of grammar.
Exactly. It connects those sometimes abstract grammar rules directly to your actual lived experience. Think about it describing your morning. I wake up, I brush my teeth, I make coffee.
Simple, repetitive actions.
That repetition, that focus on simple, regular actions is perfect for embedding the simple present tense, really making it stick.
And the sources seem to imply that demonstrating this ability, even for something so seemingly simple, it shows a level of competence that listeners pick up on.
Yes.
Whether they're consciously evaluating your language skills or just, getting to know you as a person.
It's like a microcosm, isn't it? A small window into your ability to structure thought and communicate clearly.
Yeah, they really make the case that how you describe even the most mundane part of your day, it can surprisingly reveal quite a lot about your communication ability, maybe even your cognitive approach to life.
Quite profound when you think about it that way.
Okay, so let's maybe try and bring this deep dive together a bit. What's the core takeaway from digging into this material?
Well, I think the main point is that the simple act of explaining your daily routine is far more than just describing how you spend your time. It's definitely not just filler conversation.
Right. It's identified in the sources as something more powerful.
A powerful tool, yeah, for making significant positive impressions, conveying genuine confidence, signaling that you're organized, and demonstrating fluency.
Especially in those key moments, like you said, introductions, interviews, those first evaluation points.
Exactly. And then there's this specific benefit for language learners we talked about.
Which is huge. It's highlighted as this fundamental, really practical exercise for building key grammatical skills, mastering that absolutely essential, simple present tense.
In a real-world context.
Yeah.
Not just from a textbook.
Understanding why this seemingly small skill is so valuable, it can really change how you approach opportunities to practice it, can't it?
Absolutely. Instead of just thinking, I have to answer this polite question, you might see it as a chance to actually make an impact.
Yeah.
And strengthen a core skill at the same time.
Right. It reframes the whole interaction.
It does. And, this whole discussion raises an important final question, something for you, the listener, to consider based on what we've explored here.
Okay.
If articulating something is personal and, repetitive as your daily habits, can be such a potent signal of confidence, organization, fluency, what does that suggest?
Suggest about what?
About the hidden power may be contained in clearly communicating other fundamental aspects of your life or your knowledge. What other seemingly simple descriptions or explanations might hold surprising weight when they're articulated well? That's something to think about.
Oh.
Today we're getting into something really fundamental. It's about how we talk about our lives day to day.
Right, discussing your daily routine.
Exactly. And it sounds simple, maybe.
Until you try to actually put it into words clearly. Yeah. That's often where people get a bit, stuck.
Totally. And the source material we're using for this dive, it really hits that nail on the head. Mm-hmm. It's quite targeted, focusing specifically on the language you actually need for this topic.
Yeah, it's like a toolkit almost. Very focused.
It is. And what's interesting, like you said, it doesn't try to overwhelm you with every single phrase possible.
No, it cuts right through that. It identifies the real foundational stuff, the building blocks.
So our mission then is to unpack those specific verbs, the ones the source points to as being really foundational.
The idea being that these verbs help you talk about your routine clearly and with more confidence, too.
The source basically argues that if you get a handle on this core set of action words, you're set. It's key.
And it dives right in, doesn't it? It gives us that list straight away, calls them out as super common, super useful for this exact thing.
Yeah, the actions that make up most people's days, really.
The backbone of the routine.
Okay, so let's lay them out. The verbs the source highlights are wake up, get up, which is different.
Right. Brush my teeth, take a shower, then eat breakfast.
Go to work, school.
That's a bad idea.
Study, cook, do homework.
The evening stuff often. Relax, watch TV.
And finally, sleep.
It covers a lot, actually, the essentials.
It really does seem quite comprehensive for the basics, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. And the source immediately flags the next crucial step.
Me too.
It's not just knowing the verbs in isolation. It's about putting them into actual sentences. That's where the real utility comes in.
Ah, okay. And that's the real value for you, listening. These aren't just words on a list.
Yeah.
They're the activators, the core actions you use to build your descriptions.
So when you want to share, what your morning was like, or what you usually do in the evenings.
Or even just plan for tomorrow out loud, these verbs are your anchors.
Exactly. And if you think bigger picture, using these verbs lets you kind of graduate from just listing things.
Like breakfast, work, study.
Yeah.
To actually building a narrative.
Yeah.
First, I eat breakfast, then I go to work, and later I study. It adds flow.
Let's dig into that a bit. The how. Because the source implies that even though they're simple verbs, using them correctly is important. Like you mentioned, wake up versus get up, that distinction.
Right, you might wake up at 6.
But stay in bed scrolling for half an hour before you actually get up happens to the best of us.
It does. So saying, I wake up early, but I don't get up right away, that adds precision. It uses the right tool for the job.
That's a perfect example of the nuance hiding in these, basic actions.
And it goes beyond just subject-verb sentences, right? You start adding layers.
So.
Well, when do you do these things? Adverbs of frequency, maybe? I often take a shower at night? Or how? I quickly brush my teeth.
Exactly. Prepositions of time. I eat breakfast at 7 a.m., linking words like you said, then, after that, before.
Okay, so the source gives us the foundation stones.
The core words.
So what the real clarity, the confidence it talks about, comes from building on that foundation.
Precisely. You might link two from the list. After I eat breakfast, I go to work.
Or combine them for specific context.
Yeah.
On weekends, I relax and watch TV.
Yeah, and that brings up something the source doesn't state explicitly, but it's there.
What's that?
Routines are sequences. They flow. So connecting these core verbs with simple transitions first, then, next, after that, is almost as important as the verbs themselves.
First I wake up, then I get up, after that I brush my teeth. You're stringing them together.
You are. It shows how even simple language tasks need that layering effect.
Start with the verb from the list.
Yep.
Then add the details. Time, frequency, maybe where or with what.
I brush my teeth in the bathroom with my electric toothbrush. Suddenly, it's not just an action, it's part of your personal story.
And it feels like the source picked these specific verbs because they're so universal, right?
I think so, yeah. Regardless of your job or where you live, most people perform these actions.
While the specifics change what you study, what you cook, the verbs study and cook, are constant anchors in the language.
Exactly. It cleverly avoids getting lost in endless specific nouns and focuses on the verbs that structure time.
So yeah, the list might look basic initially, but the real insight, the deep dive, is understanding why these verbs are foundational according to the source and how they act as a springboard.
A launch pad for expressing your routine clearly, but also without making it overly complex.
It's about mastering those core actions to unlock a much wider descriptive ability. Makes sense. Okay, let's wrap up this deep dive on talking about your daily routine.
We really focused on that core list of verbs, didn't we? The ones our source material identified as, essential.
Absolutely. Everything from the very start, wake up, all the way through to the end, sleep.
And that set really does give you the fundamental actions you need to just sketch out a typical day.
And the goal, which builds on what the source was getting at, is pretty powerful, actually.
Which is?
Using these specific verbs as your solid base, your foundation, so you can talk about your day with more clarity, more confidence.
Yeah, it's not just knowing the dictionary definition. It's seeing them as the starting point for actually describing things, for building sentences that make sense.
Right.
And maybe that leaves you with a thought to consider when you reflect on your day, your own rhythm.
Your unique flow.
Yeah. Which of these fundamental verbs really capture its essence, its sequence?
And perhaps how could focusing on just getting these core actions right first?
And then maybe adding simple connectors, simple details.
How could that actually simplify how you talk about your probably very busy life?
Make it easier to share, maybe? Or even just for you to understand your own patterns better. Something to think about.
There.
Today, we're diving into something really practical. How to talk about your daily routine.
Yeah, it sounds simple, maybe, but actually describing your day well, it's useful, if you're learning a language or even just trying to explain your schedule clearly.
Totally. And we've got this source material, basically a simple guide focused on just that, speaking about your day clearly, confidently. It even gives a specific example routine.
Right. So our mission, let's say, for this deep dive is to unpack that guide. We want to figure out the simplest method it suggests, why it works, according to the source, and then really see it in action with the sample routine they provide.
Okay, let's get into it. So the source kicks things off with the real foundation, right? Specific phrases it says you should use, right at the beginning.
Exactly. It points to starting lines like, every day I, or maybe I usually. Those are framed as the sort of the go-to starting points.
And the source just says, it's a simple way to talk about your day, but maybe we can dig in a bit. Why start there? What makes those phrases effective?
Well, what's interesting, I think, is how they immediately set the context. When you hear every day I give, you instantly know we're not talking about a one-off event.
Right. It signals habit. routine.
Precisely. It signals a pattern. So it manages the listener's expectations. It kind of creates a clear box for the information that's about to come, making it easier to follow along.
That makes sense. You're putting the listener on the right track from the get-go. Okay, so you've set the stage with every day I or something similar. How does the source say to, well, fill in the rest?
So this is where the source brings in its example. It doesn't just theorize, it shows you. It provides a sample routine, walking through a day step by step to demonstrate the method.
Ah, okay, so let's use their sample then, see how it works. It starts obviously at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, the sample says, I wake up at 6:30 a.m. Very clear, sets the anchor point.
And then straight into the first actions.
It follows up with, I brush my teeth and take a shower. Just listing those key morning steps, simple verbs.
Okay, and then moving towards like the main part of the day.
Then it says, then I eat breakfast and go to work. So it connects those getting ready actions to actually, leaving and starting work.
Makes sense. What about the middle of the day in this example?
According to the sample, in the afternoon, I have lunch and check emails. So it covers a break and a typical work-related task. Again, simple verbs have check.
And as the day winds down, evening time.
For the evening, it's in the evening, I cook dinner and watch a movie. So shifting from work stuff to home relaxation.
Got it. And wrapping it all up.
And finally, I go to bed around 10 p.m. It completes the cycle. Clear end point.
So the source itself calls this sample simple, clean, and complete. Looking back at that walkthrough and thinking about the source's method, what exactly makes it feel that way? Simple, clean, complete.
Well, if you break it down, complete seems to come from covering the whole arc, right? Morning to night.
Okay.
The simple and clean part, I think that's down to the language. It's very direct. Uses basic action verbs. Wake up, brush, take, eat, go, have.
Check, cook, watch.
Yeah, right. No fancy words, no complicated sentences.
Yeah.
Just the action. That straightforwardness, the lack of extra fluff, that's what feels simple and clean. It's just the main sequence.
It really does show how just focusing on the core actions brings a lot of clarity. It's not about every single detail, but those key milestones.
Exactly. And by giving us this sample right after suggesting those opening phrases.
It basically hands you a template.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's how you, the listener, can use this. The source is offering a pretty accessible framework. Start with every day I usually set the scene. And then you sort of map out your day using that same structure from sample simple actions in sequence covering morning to night. It becomes a model for your own routine.
It's like getting the skeleton outline. You use those starter phrases, then list the main things you do in order, using clear, simple words like in the example. Makes it easy for someone else to follow.
Yeah, exactly. It really emphasizes that clarity, for this kind of description anyway, comes from the structure and the simplicity, not necessarily from piling on details.
Right. You avoid getting bogged down in things that maybe aren't essential for just giving someone the basic picture of your day.
And that's maybe a broader point about communication, isn't it? Sometimes less is more. A clear, simple structure focusing on the key points can be way more effective than trying to capture every single nuance.
And the source gives us a really concrete way to do that for something pretty common, describing your day. It's a solid base.
Definitely. You could always add more detail later if someone asks, but this gives you that clear foundation.
Okay, so summing up this deep dive then, the source gives us a really straightforward method, doesn't it?
Yeah, super practical. Start with those clear signaling phrases. Every day, I usually. To show you're talking about a routine.
And then list the main steps of your day, morning to night, using simple action verbs. Just follow the pattern shown in that sample routine.
And doing that, as the source points out with its example, makes your description feel simple, clean, and complete. It covers the whole day, uses direct language. It's a great template for talking clearly about your own routine.
Okay, so we've seen the source's template, simple, clean, complete. It gives you the basic structure. Now, thinking about your own day, if you were to use this kind of clear step-by-step structure, what's maybe one small specific detail, something unique to your routine, maybe a quick interaction, a specific object you use, a tiny action that you could slot into this simple structure without making it complicated, something that adds personality but keeps that clarity?
Today, we're getting into something pretty fundamental. How we talk about our everyday lives.
Yeah, describing our routines. It seems simple, but...
Right. But how do we make it sound, natural, not just a list of things? We've got this guide here focused on spoken fluency. And our mission, basically, is to pull out the best bits, the practical stuff, to help you sound more, fluid and confident when you're talking about your day.
Exactly. It's funny, isn't it? We often chase the big grammar points, the complex vocab.
Yeah.
When actually, sometimes it's the small things, the little words that make the biggest difference to how you come across. That's what we're digging into.
Okay, so this guide really puts a spotlight on simple time expressions, stuff we use constantly.
All the time.
Think about it. How often do you actually say when you do something? It's got to be loads.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with in the morning. Seems super basic, right? But like saying I read the news versus I read the news in the morning.
Big difference.
That little phrase, it just immediately places it. What's actually happening, do you think, in the listener's head when they hear that?
Oh, that's a good way to put it. Adding in the morning, it taps into this sort of shared map of the day we all have.
Okay.
It gives an instant, a temporal frame. So the listener isn't just hearing an action in isolation. They're slotting it into, a typical morning. Makes it much easier to grasp, more relatable. It kind of leverages how we naturally organize a day in our minds.
Huh. Interesting. So it's not just saying when, it's helping the other person process the information more easily.
Precisely. It aids that cognitive processing.
Okay, cool. So what about at night? The example here is I usually study at night. Does that work the same way as in the morning for the listener? Or is there maybe a subtle difference?
They both definitely pin down the time, yeah. But at night, it often carries a slightly different connotation, maybe.
How so?
Well, in the morning often feels like the start,
Mm-hmm.
kicking things off, initiation.
There's first start.
Whereas at night, it tends to signal more the winding down part of the day, the later activities.
Okay.
So yeah, both add clarity for sure. But at night might also kind of implicitly suggest a different vibe. Maybe a different energy level or type of activity compared to the morning buzz helps build that fuller picture of the day's rhythm.
That makes a lot of sense, like a subtle clue about the pace changing through the day. Okay, next up. Before and after. These feel very direct, all about sequence.
Yeah, pure logic.
The guide gives us, I sleep after dinner. Simple sentence, but after is doing some heavy lifting there, isn't it? Establishing the order. How does that help the listener specifically?
Well, what's really going on is that before and after, they build a mental timeline. Click, click, click.
Right, step by step.
Exactly. They establish that logical flow between events. So I sleep after dinner. It's not just two things happening, sleep and dinner. It's about the link between them.
The connection in time.
Yes. That sequential information lets the listener follow your routine much more easily. It creates a clearer, a more coherent mental map of your evening. Mm-hmm. It's about understanding that, well, if not causality, at least the temporal dependency. This happens, then that happens.
Gotcha. It's like putting up signposts along the way. Okay, and then we have around. I have to admit, I sometimes forget this one when I'm talking about my schedule, and then people think I'm super rigid or something. It's funny how one word changes things. The example is I leave home around 8 a.m. What's the value of being a bit fuzzy with time like that?
Oh, that's a great point about sounding rigid. Around is fantastic because it acknowledges reality, doesn't it?
Yeah, life isn't always on the dot.
Exactly. Our days rarely run like perfect clockwork, so using around or maybe about, it reflects that truth. It makes your descriptions sound less, robotic and more authentic.
More human.
More human, exactly. It signals you're giving an estimate, which manages expectations, like you said, but also just feels more natural. It suggests a more relaxed, realistic approach to time, which is, let's face it, how most of us actually operate day to day.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so we've looked at these specific words in the morning, at night, before, after, around. What's the big picture here? The overall effect of consciously weaving these into how we speak. The guide says it leads to sounding more fluent, more natural, and that boosts confidence. Can you unpack that link a bit?
Sure. When you start using these time markers consistently, your descriptions just gain this richness, this context. They flow better.
Right.
You're not mentally pausing as much, trying to figure out how to place the event in time. It starts to become more automatic, part of the description itself.
Less hesitation.
Less hesitation, fewer filler words like and up. Well, maybe fewer and ums about the timing anyway. And that smoothness contributes directly to sounding more fluent. And naturally, when you feel like you're communicating clearly, smoothly, effectively, that confidence just follows, doesn't it? It's a kind of positive feedback loop. Clearer speech leads to feeling more confident, which leads to even clearer speech.
It's like these tiny words are doing a huge job behind the scenes. They're the unsung heroes, maybe.
I like that.
Yes.
Unsung heroes.
It's not about flashy vocabulary, is it? It's about using these basic tools really effectively to build clarity and that natural rhythm.
Precisely. These seemingly small choices have a big impact because they line up with how our brains naturally work with time and sequence. They give these crucial little cues that help the listener understand without even really thinking about it. Just leads to smoother, easier communication all around.
Okay. So the main takeaway here seems pretty clear. By consciously, deliberately using these simple time words in the morning, at night, before, after, and around, you can really make describing your day sound much more natural, more fluent.
And more confident as a result. Yeah.
It's a subtle change, maybe, but sounds like it can have a pretty powerful effect on your spoken fluency.
Absolutely. It's a great reminder, I think, that really effective communication isn't always about, massive changes or complex structures.
Right.
Often it's mastering these small, fundamental details that really elevates how well we connect and get our ideas across clearly, confidently.
Okay, so for you listening, here's a little something to chew on. Next time you find yourself talking about your day, maybe just try consciously putting in one or two of these time expressions, deliberately.
Notice what happens.
Yeah, pay attention. Does it change how clear your description feels? Does it maybe even shift how confident you feel saying it? And then think beyond just time. What other simple word categories, maybe words about where you do things or how you do them, could have a similar kind of powerful but maybe understated effect on how you communicate?
Ooh, good question.
It's really about becoming more aware, isn't it?
Yeah.
More mindful of the basic tools we actually already have and just using them with a bit more intention. Jumping straight into some source material today. And the focus is really all about understanding and, talking about a daily routine.
That's right. And we're working with a pretty interesting source here. It's a short list of quite specific questions. They really provide a clear framework, for thinking about the key parts of a day.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to unpack what these specific questions highlight about the structure of a typical day and maybe why thinking about them is actually useful for you. The material we're looking at gives us these 5 core questions to explore together.
Yeah. And just to lay them out, those questions are, what time do you wake up? That's the first one. Then do you work or study? After that, what do you do in the afternoon? Then how do you relax in the evening? And finally, do you follow the same routine on weekends?
Okay, right. Let's unpack this list then. The very first question, what time do you wake up? I mean, that immediately sets the stage, doesn't it? It's literally the starting gun for the day.
It is, yeah. It's fascinating how fundamental just that one piece of information is. It doesn't just tell you when someone physically gets out of bed. It sort of anchors their entire potential schedule. Think about circadian rhythms, right? That wake-up time often dictates the body's internal clock for the whole day. It influences energy levels, focus windows. I mean, why start talking about a routine anywhere else? It makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. And then, bang! The questions jump right into, do you work or study? This feels like it's immediately trying to pin down the kind of the main engine driving the day for a lot of folks.
Yes, exactly. It quickly gets to that core commitment. For, a huge portion of people, work or study structures the biggest block of their time and energy. It doesn't really matter if it's a traditional 9-to-5 shift work, freelancing, being a student, whatever it is. That status often dictates the inflexible points in the day. Everything else just sort of orbits around those. It's basically asking, what's the main thing your day is built to accommodate?
Right. What's the non-negotiable part?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on, we hit, what do you do in the afternoon? This feels like it's covering that, significant midday chunk. Maybe after the morning push or maybe continuing it.
Yeah, and this highlights that the afternoon isn't just leftover time. It's a distinct phase. It needs its own definition, sort of. For some, it's just continuing that core work or study. But for others, maybe where flexibility kicks in, errands, personal projects, picking up kids, or even just hitting that infamous afternoon slump.
Yeah, the slump.
So defining the segment acknowledges it's often pretty different from the maybe more structured morning. It prompts you to think about how you manage energy and tasks in that midday window.
That makes sense. And then here's where I think it gets really interesting. The questions then ask, how do you relax in the evening? This seems to acknowledge that a day isn't just about doing stuff, about productivity. There has to be a shift away from that.
Oh, absolutely. This point is crucial. because that ability to disconnect, to actually recover, it's essential for well-being, isn't it? It's asking about the winding down process. What happens after the day's main jobs are done? Is it active relaxation, like, say, exercise, or passive, like watching TV, or maybe social? And for many people today, truly switching off is a real challenge.
Definitely.
So this question can be surprisingly revealing about someone's boundaries and, well, their self-care practices.
Yeah, the how seems important there, not just the if.
Exactly.
Okay, and finally, the list wraps up with, do you follow the same routine on weekends? This immediately brings in that idea of like a weekly rhythm variation.
Absolutely. Because a routine isn't just one 24-hour block repeated, is it? It's a pattern across the whole week. And weekends, well, they serve a different purpose for most people. It could be rest, catching up on chores, hobbies, seeing friends. So this question forces you to compare and contrast. How much does your weekday structure spill over? Is the weekend a complete break, a total reset, or just a slightly tweaked version of the weekday?
So looking back at the list, it's kind of remarkable, really, how just these 5 simple points, the wake-up time, the main gig work study, what happens in the afternoon, how you unwind in the evening, and the weekend difference. They really do capture the essential checkpoints of a day and a week.
They truly do. It's a concise way, but pretty comprehensive, actually, for listening to maybe map out the core rhythm and structure of your own day without getting bogged down in all the tiny details,
Yeah.
They're kind of the main pillars that define how your time is spent and organized.
It really makes you think about why these particular questions were the ones chosen by the source to define a routine.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's maybe a provocative thought for you to consider based just on this list we've been discussing. These 5 questions focus on, let's see, start of the day.
Wake up time.
The main structured block.
Work or study.
The flexible midsection.
The afternoon.
The transition to rest.
The evening relaxation.
And the difference from the norm.
Weekends.
Right. So what does this specific selection tell us about the sort of fundamental anchors and pivot points we commonly use to understand and talk about the flow of time in our daily and weekly lives?
That's a great question. It suggests, I think, that we primarily define routine by these key transitions and these core commitments. How we enter the day, what big things demand structure, how we handle the less defined middle bit, how we exit towards rest, and crucially, how we break that cycle periodically.
Exactly. So as you think about your own routine, maybe consider what answering just these 5 questions reveals about its core shape, and perhaps where you might have flexibility or challenges you hadn't fully articulated before.
Today, we're looking at something that seems super straightforward, almost basic, really. Just describing your daily routine.
Right.
We've got this the simple little sample conversation. And our mission really is to dig into it, to see what we can pull out about communicating clearly and, confidently, things you can actually use.
Exactly. It looks simple, maybe even trivial on the surface, but sometimes the most useful lessons are hiding right there in the basics.
Yeah.
So our source today is just a really standard question and answer about a typical day.
Okay, so let's just hear it. It's quick. Person A starts things off, asks person B a question.
Person A just says, what's your daily routine like?
Okay, simple enough. And person B answers.
Well, I usually wake up at 7. I get ready to go to college. After classes, I do some homework. And in the evening, I play guitar or read a book.
That's it. Short and sweet.
Very. So simple and run. But let's unpack that a bit. Why does this actually work? What makes this little answer feel, well, effective?
Yeah, what's good about it? I mean, one of the first things that kind of jumps out at me is just how direct it is.
Direct how?
Well, person B just answers the question. A asks, what's your routine? And boom, they get the routine. There's no, beating around the bush.
Yeah, no long preamble or anything.
Exactly. No, that's an interesting question or anything like that. Just straight in.
That immediacy is actually pretty key, I think. Notice person B starts with, well, I usually wake up at 7.
Right.
That is maybe a tiny buffer.
Yeah.
But then it's straight into the core information. No unnecessary fluff that can sometimes just muddy the waters.
Yeah. Make you wonder when they're actually going to get to the point.
Exactly. It signals, maybe subtly, a kind of comfort with the topic. Yeah, I know my routine. Here it is.
And the words they use. I mean, it couldn't be simpler, could it?
Absolutely. Wake up, get ready, go to college.
Do homework, play guitar, read a book.
Yeah, these are just everyday words. Stuff everyone understands immediately. There's no jargon, no complicated phrasing you need to decode.
Right. That makes it super accessible.
Which is just crucial for clarity, isn't it? I mean, imagine if they'd said something like, ooh, I don't know.
Uh-oh. Go on.
Like, upon cessation of my nocturnal rest cycle at approximately, 700 hours, I initiate personal preparations prior to proceeding towards my designated institution of higher learning.
Okay, point taken.
It's the same info, basically, but it's just so much harder to follow, and it feels stuffy, impersonal.
Yeah, the simple vocabulary just works. Message received, loud and clear.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is the flow, how it's structured.
You mean like chronologically?
Exactly. It just walks you through the day, morning, wake up, college, then afternoon, homework, then evening, the guitar or the book.
It gives you a clear picture. It makes it really easy to visualize their day, actually.
Yeah, that chronological order, it taps into how we naturally think about time, doesn't it? By laying it out in the sequence it happens, person B basically gives person A, and you listening, a mental roadmap. It's just much easier to grasp and remember.
Yeah, provides a framework.
Definitely.
It's interesting, too, that they include both the necessary stuff, like college and homework.
The obligations.
Right, the obligations. But also the leisure things, the guitar, the reading. That makes it feel a bit more, rounded, relatable.
Absolutely relatable. Yeah. Including those leisure bits paints a much fuller picture, doesn't it? It goes beyond just a list of tasks.
Yeah.
It adds that human element. Makes it feel more like a genuine peek into their life, not just a schedule.
Okay, so we've got directness, simple language, logical flow, bit of personal touch.
Right. And what's fascinating, I think, is how all these simple things, this directness, this easy language, the clear flow, they all kind of add up to an overall feeling of, confidence.
Confidence, really. Even from just describing a routine. How does that work?
Well, think about it. That directness we mentioned, getting straight to the point, it subtly suggests that person B is, comfortable with their routine. They don't feel the need to hedge or apologize or over-explain.
Okay. Like, this is what I do. Plain and simple.
Exactly. They know what they do. They state it clearly. There's no umming and ahhing that might suggest uncertainty.
That makes sense. And there wasn't really any hesitation, was there? I mean, that initial, well, maybe, but then they just launched right in.
Precisely. That smooth delivery, even for something so mundane, it projects a kind of ease, an assurance. It's like they own their routine,
Yeah, I see that.
And the friendly tone, too. It's not robotic or super formal. It suggests they're comfortable sharing this, which, again, it kind of reinforces that quiet confidence.
Okay, so we've pulled apart this tiny exchange and found these elements: clarity, friendliness, confidence. But so what? What's the actual takeaway for you listening? Why should you care about this super basic example?
Well, if you think about connecting this to your own life, this little interaction actually gives you a pretty powerful template. A template for all sorts of communication, really.
Like what?
Like maybe you're explaining a project at work or describing how you approach a problem or even just, telling someone what you did over the weekend. The same ideas apply.
Right. So say you're prepping for a meeting. You need to explain your team's workflow for something. Instead of getting totally bogged down in jargon or sort of rambling through the steps out of order, think about person B.
Be direct.
Use simple language.
Lay out the steps logically.
And that clarity itself is going to project confidence, right?
Or imagine you're catching up with a new colleague, maybe, and they ask how you usually handle a certain task.
Okay.
You'd say something like, oh yeah, well, I usually start by checking the latest figures, then I figure out the main priorities. After that, I focus on getting the core task done, and then I always do a quick review at the end.
Simple, direct, easy to follow.
Exactly. They get it straight away.
It even works for casual stuff. Someone asks about your hobbies instead of just, oh, I like music.
Yeah, which is fine, but a bit vague.
You could say, well, in the evenings, I often unwind by either playing a bit of guitar or maybe checking out some new albums.
Again, clear, concise, gives a slightly better picture. It's not about trying to make your life sound amazing.
No, it's just about being effective, communicating clearly.
Which makes me wonder, how often do we maybe unintentionally make things more complicated than they need to be?
Good question.
Maybe using jargon we think sounds smart or just not structuring our thoughts before we speak. This simple example is a great reminder that sometimes the most powerful communication is actually the most straightforward.
So the core idea here, the big takeaway, is that even in something as simple, as seemingly unremarkable as describing a daily routine, we can find these fundamental principles: clarity, friendliness, confidence. And these aren't just for describing routines, they apply everywhere.
They really do. And maybe a final thought for you to chew on. Think about how you currently describe things. Your own routines maybe, or processes at work, or even just what you did yesterday.
Okay.
Are there any small tweaks you could make? Could you be a bit more direct, maybe simplify the language slightly, organize your points a bit more logically, like person B did, just by drawing a little inspiration from this very basic but actually quite effective example? You might be surprised how much more clarity and, confidence you can bring to your own interactions.
Let's dive in.
Right.
For this deep dive, we've got this set of notes, some material, and it's all focused on something that, sounds pretty simple, talking about your daily routine.
Yeah, on the surface, you think, okay, listing what you do.
Yeah.
Bit dry, maybe.
Exactly. But our mission today, really digging into this material, is to unpack what the sources say is surprisingly significant about routines, what they kind of quietly reveal about you.
And what's really interesting, and the source material jumps right into this, is the idea that, describing your day, it's not just stating facts.
No.
No, the material really argues it's like a window, something much deeper. It reflects your inner workings, your priorities,
right,
all that.
Right. So the source is basically saying the structure of your day, your habits, they aren't just neutral actions. They're presented as powerful indicators.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And if we dig into how the sources explain this, they link specific bits of your routine right to, core personal traits.
Okay, like what?
Well, for instance, consistency. Just something as simple as your wake-up time. That's highlighted as a really strong signal of discipline.
Okay.
It's not just that you wake up, but the regularity, day in, day out, that's what the material points to.
That makes sense. It's the sticking to it, the commitment to that pattern, even when maybe you don't feel like it.
Exactly.
And the sources also seem to connect routines to time management.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. The materials suggest that how you structure, say, the first hour of your day, that's like a direct reflection.
A reflection of what?
Of what you prioritize. And importantly, your ability to actually manage your time effectively. Are you jumping on a key task? Or are you just sort of letting the day happen to you? The source argues your routine reveals that choice.
It's about how you use that early time, that specific allocation.
Precisely. How you allocate that precious early time.
Okay, so it's not just having a routine, but the details inside it. They're what speak volumes about things like discipline and time management skills. What about goals? Do these sources link routines to personal goals?
They do, yeah. But maybe not always in the most obvious way,
How so?
Well, the sources suggest that if you look at where you consistently spend your time each day, even in small chunks, it points towards what you're actually working towards, implicitly or explicitly.
Interesting.
So, if your routine includes dedicated time for, learning a skill, or maybe working on a side project, or even just consistent exercise, the material argues these recurring actions. They reveal your underlying aspirations, your goals.
Even if you don't state them out loud.
Right. Regardless of whether you see them outright, your routine basically becomes this map of your intentions over time.
That's a really fascinating angle, that your daily actions are sort of charting your course, even if you're not consciously thinking, this is for goal X. Now, the source material, it also touches on how we should talk about these routines. It makes a specific point about pride.
Yes, and this is, I think, a really key takeaway from the material we looked at. It explicitly says you should talk about your routine with pride.
Pride. Even if it feels small.
Yes, no matter how small or, insignificant some parts might feel to you, the reasoning they give is that any consistent routine, even a modest one, it demonstrates discipline. It shows a conscious effort to manage your time. And those are valuable skills, right? So the sources suggest that acknowledging them, talking about them with pride, actually reinforces them. It kind of reframes these maybe mundane habits as actual achievements and consistency and self-management.
So it's about recognizing the effort and the skill that's inherent in just maintaining a pattern. It's not about whether the routine itself is glamorous or world-changing.
Precisely. And there's also a very practical application discussed in the sources for using your routine.
Oh yeah, what's that?
There is, and it's quite clever actually. The material suggests using your daily routine itself as a kind of framework.
A framework for what?
For learning and speaking practice. It specifically mentions learning English as an example.
Okay, how would that work?
Well, the idea is to regularly articulate what you were doing as you're doing it. or maybe recounting your day later using the language you're learning.
So like describing making coffee or your commute or working.
Exactly. Or exercising. But doing it in English, for example. The source material presents this as a really powerful kind of built-in tool for consistent practice.
Because you have to do those things anyway.
Right. It turns these necessary daily actions into ready-made learning opportunities.
Huh. That basically turns the routine into an active learning instrument. It leverages the repetition that's already there in daily life for skill development. That's a really concrete example of how the routine isn't just something you do, but something you can actively use.
Exactly. It transforms the passive structure of your day into an